If Valorant is bad, why not 0 players? This is a question that I've been wondering about for a while. All I hear about this game in some way always goes back to, this game is a heaping steaming pile of dog shit. No one wants to say the game is good or even enjoyable, and people who are making a living out of it are just leaving one after another, even if it means huge financial hits. And emotionally, I wouldn't even disagree. I too feel like this game has become stale like a dry piece of bread. We can all look at a game and say it's bad, boring, or any other mildly negative adjective, but the game isn't poor quality or poorly made. What the issues stem from are much more complicated than just the quality of the game. So to end up in this situation, what has Valorant been doing all this time? What made people mad about this game? What needs to be done for people to be satisfied? And why, after all of this, the game still is one of the most popular games still being played and watched by the millions. In the beginning of Valorant's life, it brought a unique experience for players to find. For some, it was an alternative for CSGO or Siege, and for casual gamers, it was a nice social game that you could have fun playing with friends. At the start, Valorant had all the pieces together for a fresh, successful game. Big launch and lots of people talking about it. Players were experimenting, mastering skills, learning new things, and trying to understand the game in every possible way. Soon it became evident that the balance of the game was, to say the least, questionable, with agents getting big changes and nerfs left and right. Raze had 2 nades, Jett had 3 smokes, and she could reset her ultimate with a right click that was way more deadly than it is today. The whole game was crazy, and that is what people liked about it back then. But in time, you can get killed by a nade so many times before it starts feeling a little excessive. So balance started pouring out, and the game became more tame. Going forward, the plan for content in Valorant was to add new agents, maps, and other stuff every once in a while. But above all, the most dedicated aspect of this game was first of all skins and esports. It was all about being competitive, use that as marketing, and make billions selling overpriced skins. And that is exactly what they did. For actual gameplay content since launch, we have had 17 new agents and 9 maps. And this was the content that was supposed to make the game feel fresh. There have been some reworks on the side too, but those aren't really that significant in this context. Agents were launched about 3 months apart from each other, on average with some variation. The agents coming into the game were fun and added new ways to play the game if you found the new agent something your speed. Some agents like Chamber and Astra were unbelievably overpowered and broke the game. Their other point was a glitch where you could sell one of your Astra stars and buy a better gun in the round you're only supposed to be able to buy pistols. And that is the extent of broken we are talking about. In my opinion, freshly released agents won't feel good if they are weak, so I'm more on the side that new agents should be more strong than weak, as long as you tone them down in at least a month. Riot thought about that and said fuck no, so these agents were overpowered for years. But at these times, the game was still during its prime, and rarely could you see people complain about the game becoming stale and boring. That wouldn't happen until something like 2024. During 2020 to 2024, the updates for this game started to feel repeating. Outside of agents, the game didn't have any other gameplay related content that felt impactful. The updates given were always the same. New agent, new map, truckload of new skins, rinse and repeat. That has been the content plan for Valorant up until today actually, with the most gameplay impacting overall changes being visual indicators of smokes disappearing. When you look at the big picture, Valorant hasn't had any overhauls, any lasting changes bigger than bullet amount tuning or run and gun nerfs. This isn't something a game has to do, but it does cause for some people to get fed up with the game, especially when there are issues that aren't being fixed, like agents being more and more frustrating to play against. I will talk about this later in more detail. But to most players, the game just feels static, and a part of the player base finds that, well, boring. Cool systems and updates have not been added, like a replay system, better custom games, and I personally think currently it's laughable. The fact that you can't play agents that you haven't unlocked in a custom game is very weird. You can't host public games, and you can't modify really anything major. Stuff like this would make the community-driven content so much more alive. We do have replays coming sometime in the future, and that is a good sign, but it doesn't change the fact that this game has not changed at all during its runtime. Is that a bad thing? I don't know, but there definitely are people who think so. After 5 years of this game using the same formula for releases, people have been using their voices to maybe get something better in the future. But to the community, it can feel like Riot Games just doesn't care. Obviously that statement is not true, especially the devs most likely care a lot for this game. But for people who actively talk about issues they experience, it feels like they don't. And that's the important part. What does it feel like? And I would guess the feeling to be frustration. So this segment is about that. It can feel extremely bad seeing a game have the resources and means to make changes for the better, but not doing the improvements. The fact that someone is capable of doing things better for something and they choose not to is really convoluting. They 100% can afford to give people more free stuff, they 100% can make agents free, they could make progression rewards the shop so much better, but no. All this comes down to maximizing profits. At the end of my thoughts, I just think it's an oh well thing. You can't tell a company to stop prioritizing profit, but you can't say it feels good either. The skin and progression situation in this game is definitely not good. But more importantly, what about the part of the game that most people find interesting? Gameplay, and more specifically agents and maps. The question about them is, have they been good or bad over the years? The conversation has infinite range from opinion to another. There have been people who say the agent designs feel underwhelming or borderline game killing. Some people love them, some people don't care. So where does the majority lie? On the side of maps, the conversation seems to be a bit more one-sided. There are a lot of people who find the most recent maps like Abyss and Sunset just horrible. Corrode is a map that is the actual most recent map, but to my knowledge, the community feedback has been fairly positive. My personal opinion is that Abyss is the worst map in the game by 10 light years, but most other maps feel fine to me. Obviously some worse than others. Agents have been in general kinda weird. I think the last agent that got a decent amount of hype was ISO with his weird aim training shield mechanic, but that became old very quickly, with otherwise very boring kit in most people's eyes. Vice, Deadlock, Teho, Harbo, and Waylay rising as some of the least liked agents by the community, contrasted by Clove, who has been received as one of the most liked characters in the game entirely. Some new agents have introduced objectively frustrating abilities like ISO shield and Teho's whole kit. People just don't like to play against stuff like that, even if it's not overpowered. My personal opinion is that Valorant agents don't get many fun exciting mechanics, like how Gekko can pick up his abilities. Stuff like that gives very different gameplay loops and strategies with abilities and how you use them. And continuing with my own opinion, I don't think the game shakes itself up well enough. Again, only my opinion, but to me the patch notes in Valorant are always, well mostly always, very minuscule. When I can't tell seasons apart from each other at all after patch notes, it starts feeling a bit pointless. I'm talking about the lack of big changes and new ways to play an agent. If an agent is in a good position, then fair enough. At the same time, re-experiencing an agent who just got drastic changes is simply fun. Good examples of this being Phoenix getting a small rework with his self-healing and wall going through, well, other walls. It changed the character in a way that made it fresh and the opposite of stale. Same with Reyna when her heal got changed and dismiss made you actually fast. Stuff like that is what keeps a game fresh, and when there isn't that, well, we see a lot of disappointed players. And without it, how are we going to keep people interested? Looking at the current shared feelings and thoughts of the Valorant player base, it's clear that people are starting to feel the game growing more and more plain and tasteless. We can all look at that, but still, regardless of what people say, the game is still one of the most successful games of all time. Not that it only was, it still is. So the question becomes, what is the deal with this game? Even if all you hear about the game is that it's in a boring state, there seems to be no decrease in players and viewers. Did Valorant create something so fundamentally addicting or great that people will play it even if they don't seem to know why? Or is this the current moment, the moment all the seeds of this game's death starting to grow? Is the death of Valorant unraveling right in front of our eyes, with this being the start? To me, it looks like the game isn't going to die. From the start, Valorant has cultivated a culture that is based on esports, the act of making a play and being in the spotlight for that moment. It's something that will never change, just because the game is becoming stale. Valorant to me is one of those games that has such a good construction, it will never die. Same with Counter-Strike. The core idea and execution is so strong that the game doesn't need to rely on big updates to keep the game fresh. Obviously, with Valorant, the death of the game is always possible if they choose to do something that ends up as a massive mistake. For example, Overwatch used to be in the same position as Valorant. With many people thinking the game is so far from even the chance of dying, the game doesn't have to keep its eyes on any possible threats. Then obviously Brigada was added, which started a chain of events which turned the game into something no one could ever have thought of, in a bad way. Overwatch in 2025 has had the benefit of learning from mistakes and has made one of the biggest comebacks in gaming history in my opinion. With Overwatch 2 from being initially a money grab that in general was just horrible trash, to one specific person not having his hands on the game anymore and Microsoft letting the actual dev team work on the game and turn it into something truly unique and fun. with perks, stadium, new systems, reworks, and a future that looks actually promising and exciting. That was a side tangent, but it's still relevant to the current situation of Valorant. For many people, including me, Valorant feels like that state of Overwatch, especially the launch of Overwatch 2, when the game didn't change at all in years, with patches, heroes, and maps being the only additions to the game gameplay-wise. Sound familiar? Well, that is exactly what Valorant has been doing for the last 5 years straight. And I think there are a few possible outcomes we might see from Valorant. 1. They keep doing the same safe thing of uploading new maps and agents while keeping the same position it has been in for years, without big plans for the future. 2. They see community outrage and start making changes, which is already happening with replays and the plans for tuning down utility or making it more digestible, although they could do this so much better with how much money they have. 3. They already have or are planning for working on something big in the future, like something similar to Arcane, sequel, maybe not, or a spin-off game. Whatever they decide to do, the likelihood of Valorant dying is very low. I personally think it would be better to make innovating changes and updates to better the experience and offer new ones, but if they choose not to, that's totally understandable and fine. If the game truly was bad, it would not have the player count, viewer count, and community it has. So if Valorant is bad, why not 0 players? It's because Valorant isn't bad. The game just isn't moving anywhere, and that can make it boring for anyone who plays it consistently. Players want updates, but at the end of the day, Valorant decides what it wants to do itself. So we'll have to see about that in the future. If you enjoyed this thing even a little, please consider subscribing. It could be the difference I need to start doing this more consistently. I also put a lot of time and effort into this video that I can't very often do. So if you have it in you, show some support. I would appreciate it infinitely. Thank you for watching.